Section 35 of An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. An Essay Concerning Human Understanding by John Locke. Chapter 28 of Other Relations. Number 1. Ideas of proportional relations. Besides the before mentioned occasions of time, place, and causality of comparing or referring things one to another, there are, as I have said, infinite others, some whereof I shall mention. First, the first I shall name is some one simple idea, which, being capable of parts or degrees, affords an occasion of comparing the subjects wherein it is to one another, in respect of that simple idea, for example, whiter, sweeter, equal, more, and so on. These relations, depending on the equality and excess of the simple idea in several subjects, may be called, if one will, proportional, and that these are only conversant about those simple ideas received from sensation or reflection is so evident that nothing need to be said to evince it. Number 2. Natural relation. Secondly, another occasion of comparing things together or considering one thing so as to include in that consideration some other thing is the circumstances of their origin or beginning, which being not afterwards to be altered, make the relations depending thereon as lasting as the subjects to which they belong, for example, father and son, brothers, cousin germans, and so on, which have their relations by one community of blood, wherein they partake in several degrees, countrymen, that is, those who are born in the same country or tract of ground, and these I call natural relations, wherein we may observe that mankind have fitted their notions and words to the use of common life, and not to the truth and extent of things, for it is certain that in reality the relation is the same betwixt the begetter and the begotten, in the several races of other animals as well as man. But yet it is seldom said, this bull is the grandfather of such a calf, or that pigeons are cousin germans. It is very convenient that, by distinct names, their relation should be observed and marked out in mankind, there being occasion, both in laws and other communications one with another, to mention and take notice of men under these relations. From whence also rise the obligation of several duties amongst men, whereas, in brutes, men having very little or no cause to mind these relations, they have not thought fit to give them distinct and peculiar names. This, by the way, may give us some light into the different state and growth of languages, which being suited only to the convenience of communication, are proportioned to the notions men have, and the commerce of thoughts familiar amongst them, and not to the reality or extent of things, nor to the various respects might be found among them, nor the different abstract considerations might be framed about them. Where they had no philosophical notions, they had no terms to express them, and it is no wonder men should have framed no names for those things they found no occasion to discourse of. From whence it is easy to imagine why, as in some countries, they may have not so much as the name for a horse, and in others, where they are more careful of the pedigree of their horses than of their own, that there they may not have only names for particular horses, but also of their several relations of kindred one to another. Number 3. Ideas of instituted of voluntary relations. Thirdly, sometimes the foundation of considering things with reference to one another is some act whereby any one comes by a moral right, power, or obligation to do something. Thus, a general is one that hath power to command an army, and an army, under a general, is a collection of armed men obliged to obey one man. A citizen, or a burgher, is one who has the right to certain privileges in this or that place. All this sort depending upon men's wills, or agreement in society, I call instituted or voluntary, and may be distinguished from the natural, in that they are most, if not all of them, some way or other alterable, and separable from the persons to whom they have sometimes belonged, though neither of the substances so related be destroyed. Now, though these are all reciprocal, as well as the rest, and contain in them a reference of two things one to other, yet, because one of the two things often wants a relative name importing that reference, men usually take no notice of it, and the relation is commonly overlooked. For example, a patron and a client are easily allowed to be relations, but a constable or dictator are not so readily at first hearing considered as such, because there is no peculiar name for those who are under the command of a dictator or constable, expressing a relation to either of them, though it be certain that either of them hath a certain power over some others, and is so far related to them, as well as a patron is to his client, or general to his army. Number 4. Ideas of moral relations. Fourthly, there is another sort of relation, which is the conformity or disagreement men's voluntary actions have to rule to which they are referred, and by which they are judged of, which, I think, may be called moral relation, as being that which denominates our moral actions, and deserves well to be examined, there being no part of knowledge wherein we should be more careful to get determined ideas, and avoid as much as may be obscurity and confusion. Human actions, when with their various ends, objects, manners, and circumstances, they are framed into a distinct complex ideas, are, as has been shown, so many mixed modes, a great part whereof have names annexed to them. Thus, supposing gratitude to be a readiness to acknowledge unwritten kindness received, polygamy to be the having more wives than one at once, when we frame these notions thus in our minds, we have there so many determined ideas of mixed modes. But this is not all that concerns our actions. It is not enough to have determined ideas of them, and to know what names belong to such and such combination of ideas. We have a further and greater concernment, and that is to know whether such actions, so made up, are morally good or bad. Number 5. Moral good and evil. Good and evil, as hath been shown. Book 2, Chapter 20, Section 2, and Chapter 21, Section 43, are nothing but pleasure or pain, or that which occasions or procures pleasure or pain to us. Moral good and evil, then, is only the conformity or disagreement of our voluntary actions to some law, whereby good or evil is drawn on us from the will and power of the lawmaker; which good and evil, pleasure or pain, attending our observance, or breach of the law by the decree of lawmaker, is that we call reward and punishment. Number 6. Moral rules. Of these moral rules or laws, to which men generally refer, and by which they judge of the rectitude or gravity of their actions, there seem to me to be three sorts, with their three different enforcements or rewards and punishments. For, since it would be utterly in vain to suppose a rule set to the free actions of men, without annexing to it some enforcement of good and evil to determine his will, we must, wherever we suppose a law, suppose also some reward or punishment annexed to that law. It would be in vain for one intelligent being to set a rule to the actions of another, if he had it not in his power to reward the compliance with, and punish deviation from his rule, by some good and evil, that is not the natural product and consequences of the action itself. For that, being a natural convenience or inconvenience, would operate of itself without a law. This, if I mistake not, is the true nature of all law, properly so called. Number 7. Laws. The laws that men generally refer their actions to judge of their rectitude or obliquity, seem to me to be these three: 1. The divine law; 2. The civil law; 3. The law of opinion or reputation, if I may so call it. By the relation they bear to the first of three, men judge whether their actions are sins or duties; by the second, whether they be a criminal or innocent; and by third, whether they be virtues or vices. Number 8. Divine law, the measure of sin and duty. First, the divine law, whereby that law which God has set to the actions of men, whether promulgated to them by the light of nature, or the voice of revelation, that God has given a rule whereby men should govern themselves, I think there is nobody so brutish as to deny. He has a right to do it. We are his creatures. He has goodness and wisdom to direct our actions to that which is best, and he has power to enforce it by rewards and punishments of infinite weight and duration in another life, for nobody can take us out of his hands. This is the only true touchstone of moral rectitude, and, by comparing them to this law, it is that men judge of the most considerable moral good or evil of their actions; that is, whether, as duties or sins, they are like to procure them happiness or misery from the hands of the Almighty. Number 9. Civil law, the measure of crimes and innocence. Secondly, the civil law, the rule set by the commonwealth to the actions of those who belong to it, is another rule to which men refer their actions, to judge whether they be criminal or no. This law nobody overlooks, the rewards and punishments that enforce it being ready at hand, and suitable to the power that makes it, which is the force of commonwealth, engaged to protect the lives, liberties, and possessions of those who live according to its law, and has power to take away life, liberty, or goods from him who disobeys, which is the punishment of offences committed against his law. Number 10. Philosophical law, the measure of virtue and vice. Thirdly, the law of opinion or reputation. Virtue and vice are the names pretended and supposed everywhere to stand for actions in their own nature, right and wrong; and as far as they really are so applied, they so far are coincident with the divine law above mentioned. But yet, whatever is pretended, this is visible, that these names, virtue and vice, in the particular instances of their application, though the very nations and societies of men in the world are constantly attributed only to such actions as in each country and society are in reputation or discredit. Nor is it to be thought strange that men everywhere should give the name of virtue to those actions which amongst them are judged praiseworthy, and call that vice which they account blamable, since otherwise they would condemn themselves, if they should think anything right to which they allowed not commendation, anything wrong which they let pass without blame. Thus the measure of what is everywhere called and esteemed virtue and vice is the approbation or dislike, praise or blame, which, by a secret and tacit consent, establishes itself in the several societies, tribes, and clubs of men in the world, whereby several actions come to find credit or disgrace amongst them, according to the judgment, maxims, or fashion of that place. For, though men uniting into politic societies, they have resigned up to the public the disposing of all their force, so that they cannot employ it against any fellow citizens any further than the law of the country directs. Yet they retain still the power of thinking well or ill, approving or disapproving of the actions of those whom they live amongst and converse with, and by this approbation and dislike they establish amongst themselves what they will call virtue and vice. Number 11. The measure that men commonly apply to determine what they call virtue and vice. That this is the common measure of virtue and vice will appear to any one who considers that though that passes for vice in one country, which is counted a virtue, or at least not vice, in another, yet everywhere virtue and praise, vice and blame, go together. Virtue is everywhere that which is thought praiseworthy, and nothing else but that which has the allowance of public esteem is called virtue. Virtue and praise are so united that they are often by the same name. Sunt sua premia laudi, says Virgil, and so Cicero, nihil habet natura presentantius, quam honestatem, quam laudem, quam dignitatem, quam decus, which he tells you are all names for the same thing. This is the language of the heathen philosophers, who well understood wherein their notions of virtue and vice consisted, and though perhaps by the different temper, education, fashion, maxims, or interest of different sorts of men, it fell out, that what was thought praiseworthy in one place, escaped not censure in another, and so in different societies, virtues and vices were changed. Yet, as to the main, they are not the most part kept the same everywhere. For since nothing can be more natural than to encourage with esteem and reputation that wherein every one finds his advantage, and to blame and discountenance the contrary, it is no wonder that esteem and discredit, virtue and vice, should, in a great measure, everywhere correspond with the unchangeable rule of right and wrong, which the law of God hath established, there being nothing that so directly and visible secures and advances the general good of mankind in this world, as obedience to the laws he hath set them, and nothing that breeds such mischiefs and confusion as the neglect of them. And therefore men, without renouncing all sense and reason, and their own interest, which they are so constantly true to, could not generally mistake, in placing their commendation and blame on that side that really deserved it not. Nay, even those men whose practice was otherwise, failed not to give their approbation right, few being depraved to that degree as not to condemn, at least in others, the faults they themselves were guilty of, whereby, even in the corruption of manners, the true boundaries of the laws of nature, which ought to be the rule of virtue and vice, were pretty well preferred, so that even the exhortations of inspired teachers have not feared to appeal to common repute: whatsoever is lovely, whatsoever is of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any price, etc. Philippians 4:8. Number 12. Its enforcement is commendation and discredit. If anyone shall imagine that I forgot my own notion of a law, when I make the law, whereby men judge of virtue and vice, to be nothing else but the consent of private men, who have not authority enough to make a law, especially wanting that which is so necessary and essential to a law, a power to enforce it, I think I may say, that he who imagines commendation and disgrace not to be the strong motives to men to accommodate themselves to the opinions and rules of those with whom they converse, seems little skilled in the nature or history of mankind, the greatest part whereof we shall find to govern themselves chiefly, if not solely, by this law of fashion. and so they do that which keeps them in reputation with their company, little regard the laws of God or the magistrate. The penalties that attend the breach of God's laws, some, nay perhaps most men, seldom seriously reflect on, and amongst those that do, many, whilst they break the law, entertain thoughts of future reconciliation, and making their peace for such breaches. And as to the punishments due from the law of the commonwealth, they frequently flatter themselves with the hopes of impunity. But no man escapes the punishment of the censure and dislike who offends against the fashion and opinion of the company he keeps, and would recommend himself to. Nor is there one of 10,000 who is stiff and insensible enough to bear up under the constant dislike and condemnation of his own club. He must be of a strange and unusual constitution who can content himself to live in constant disgrace and disrepute with his own particular society. Solitude many men have sought, and been reconciled to, but nobody that has the least thought or sense of a man about him can live in society under the constant dislike and ill opinion of his familiars, and those he converses with. This is a burden too heavy for human sufferance, and he must be made up of irreconcilable contradictions who can take the pleasure in company, and yet be insensible of contempt and disgrace from his companions. Number 13. These three laws the rule of moral good and evil. These three then: first, the law of God; secondly, the law of politic societies; thirdly, the law of fashion or private censure, are those to which men variously compare their actions, and it is by their conformity to one of these laws that they take their measures, when they would judge of their moral rectitude, and denominate their actions good or bad. Number 14. Morality is the relation of voluntary actions to these rules. Whether the rule to which, as to be a touchstone, we bring our voluntary actions, to examine them by, and try their goodness, and accordingly to name them, which is, as it were, the mark of the value we set upon them; whether, I say, we take that rule from the fashion of the country, or the will of the lawmaker, the mind is easily able to observe the relation any action hath to it, and to judge whether the action agrees or disagrees with the rule, and so hath a notion of moral goodness or evil, which is either conformity or not conformity of any action to that rule, and therefore is often called moral rectitude. This rule being nothing but a collection of several simple ideas, the conformity thereto is but so ordering the action, that the simple ideas belonging to it may correspond to those which the law requires. And thus we see how moral beings and notions are founded on, and terminated in, these simple ideas we have received from sensation or reflection. For example, let us consider the complex idea we signify by the word murder, and when we have taken it asunder, and examined all the particulars, we shall find them to amount to a collection of simple ideas derived from reflection or sensation, namely, first, from reflection on the operations of our own minds, we have the ideas of willing, considering, purposing beforehand, malice, or wishing ill to another, and also of life, or perception, and self motion. Secondly, from sensation, we have the collection of those simple ideas which are to be found in a man, and of some action, whereby we put an end to the perception and motion in the man, all which simple ideas are comprehended in the word murder. This collection of simple ideas, being found by me to agree or disagree with the esteem of the country I have been bred in, and to be held by most men there worthy praise or blame, I call the action virtuous and vicious. If I have the will of a supreme invisible lawgiver for my rule, then, as I suppose the action commanded or forbidden by God, I call it good or evil, sin or duty. And if I compare it to the civil law, the rule made by the legislative power of the country, I call it lawful or unlawful, a crime or no crime. So that whensoever we take the rule of moral actions, or by what standard soever we frame in our minds the idea of virtues or vices, they consist only, and are made up of collection of simple ideas, which we originally received from sense or reflection, and their rectitude or obliquity consists in agreement or disagreement with those patterns prescribed by some law. Number 15. Moral actions may be regarded whether absolutely or as ideas of relation. To conceive rightly of moral actions, we must take notice of them under this twofold consideration. First, as they are in themselves, each made up of such a collection of simple ideas, thus drunkenness or lying signifies such or such a collection of simple ideas, which I call mixed modes. And in this sense they are as much positive absolute ideas as the drinking of a horse or speaking of a parrot. Secondly, our actions are considered as good, bad, or indifferent, and in this respect they are relative, it being their conformity to or disagreement with some rule that makes them to be regular or irregular, good or bad. And so, as far as they are compared with the rule, and thereupon denominated, they come under relation. Thus the challenging and fighting with a man, as it is a certain positive mode, or particular sort of action by particular ideas, distinguished from all others, is called duelling, which, when considered in relation to the law of God, will deserve the name of sin, to the law of fashion, in some countries, valor and virtue, and to the municipal laws of some governments, a capital crime. In this case, when the positive mode has one name, and another name as it stands in relation to the law, the distinction may as easily be observed as it is in substances, where one name, for example man, is used to signify the thing, another, for example father, to signify the relation. Number 16. The denominations of actions often mislead us, but because very frequently the positive idea of the action and its moral relation are comprehended together under one name, and the same word made use of to express both the mode or action and its moral rectitude or obliquity. Therefore the relation itself is less taken notice of, and there is often no distinction made between the positive idea of the action and the reference it has to a rule, by which the confusion of those two distinct considerations under one term. Those who yield too easily to the impression of sounds, and are forward to take name for things, are often misled in their judgment of actions. Thus, the taking from another what is his, without his knowledge or allowance, is properly called stealing; but that name, being commonly understood to signify also the moral gravity of the action, and to denote its contrariety to the law, men are apt to condemn whatever they hear called stealing, as an ill action, disagreeing with the rule of right; and yet the private taking away his sword from a madman to prevent his doing mischief, though it be properly denominated stealing as the name for such a mixed mode, yet when compared to the law of God, and considered in its relation to the supreme rule, it is no sin or transgression, though the name stealing ordinarily carries such an intimation with it. Number 17. Relations innumerable, and only the most considerable here mentioned. And thus much for the relations of human actions to law, which therefore I call moral relations. It would make a volume to go over all sorts of relations. It is not, therefore, to be expected that I should here mention them all. It suffices to our present purpose to show by these what the ideas are we have of this comprehensive consideration called relation, which is so various, and the occasion of it so many as there can be of comparing things one to another, that it is not very easy to reduce it to rules or under just heads. Those I have mentioned, I think, are some of the most considerable, and such as may serve to let us see from whence we get our ideas of relations and wherein they are founded. But before I quit this argument, from what has been said, give me leave to observe. Number 18. All relations terminate in simple ideas. First, that it is evident that all relation terminates in, and is ultimately founded on, those simple ideas we got from sensation or reflection, so that all we have in our thoughts ourselves, if we think of anything or have any meaning, or would signify to others, when we use the word standing for relations, is nothing but some simple ideas, or collection of simple ideas, compared one with another. This is so manifest in that sort called proportional, that nothing can be more. For when a man says, honey is sweeter than wax, it is plain that his thoughts in the relation terminate in this simple idea, sweetness, which is equally true of all the rest, though where they are compounded or decompounded, the simple ideas they are made up of are, perhaps, seldom taken notice of. For example, when the word father is mentioned, first there is meant that particular species or collective idea signified by the word man; secondly, those sensible simple ideas signified by the word generation; and thirdly, the effects of it, and all the simple ideas signified by the word child. So the word friend, being taken for a man who loves, and is ready to do good to another, has all the following ideas to the making of it up. First, all the simple ideas comprehended in the word man, or intelligent being; secondly, the idea of love; thirdly, the idea of readiness or disposition; fourthly, the idea of action, which is any kind of thought or motion; fifthly, the idea of good, which signifies anything that may advance his happiness, and terminates at last, if examined, in particular simple ideas, of which the word good in general signifies any one, but if removed from all simple ideas, quite, it signifies nothing at all. And thus also all moral words terminate at last, though perhaps more remotely, in a collection of simple ideas, the immediate signification of relative words being very often other supposed known relations, which, if traced one to another, still end in simple ideas. Number 19. We have ordinarily as clear a notion of the relation as of the simple ideas in things on which it is founded. Secondly, that in relations, we have for the most part, if not always, as clear a notion of the relation as we have of those simple ideas wherein it is founded. Agreement or disagreement, whereon relation depends, being things whereof we have commonly as clear ideas as of any other whatsoever, it being but the distinguishing simple ideas, or their degrees one from another, without which we could have no distinct knowledge at all. For if I have a clear idea of sweetness, light, or extension, I have, too, of equal, or more, or less, of each of these. If I know that it is for one man to be born of a woman, for example, Sempronia, I know that what it is for another man to be born of the same woman, Sempronia, and so have a clear notion of brothers as of births, and perhaps clearer. For it I believed that Sempronia digged Titus out of the parsley bed, as they used to tell children, and thereby became his mother, and that afterwards In the same manner, she digged chaos out of the parsley bed. I has as clear a notion of the relation of the brothers between them, as it I had all the skill of a midwife, the notion that the same woman contributed, as mother, equally to their births, though I were ignorant or mistaken in the manner of it, being that on which I grounded the relation, and that they agreed in the circumstance of birth, let it be what it will. The comparing them then in their descent from the same person, without knowing the particular circumstances of that descent, is enough to found my notion of their having, or not having, the relation of brothers. But though the ideas of particular relations are capable of being as clear and distinct in minds of those who will duly consider them as those of mixed modes, and more determinate than those of substances, yet the names belonging to the relation are often of as doubtful and uncertain signification as those of substances or mixed modes, and much more than those of simple ideas, because relative words, being the mark of this comparison, which is made only by men's thoughts, and is an idea only in men's minds, men frequently apply them to different comparisons of things, according to their own imaginations, which do not always correspond with those of others using the same name. Number 20. The notion of relation is the same, whether the rule any action is compared to be true or false. Thirdly, that in these I call moral relations, I have a true notion of relation by comparing the action with the rule, whether the rule be true or false. For if I measure anything by a yard, I know whether the thing I measure be longer or shorter than that supposed yard, though perhaps the yard I measure by be not exactly the standard, which indeed is another inquiry. For though the rule be erroneous, and I mistaken in it, yet the agreement or disagreement observable in that which I compare with makes me perceive the relation, though, measuring by a wrong rule, I shall thereby be brought to judge amiss of its moral rectitude, because I have tried it by that which is not the true rule. Yet I am not mistaken in the relation which that action bears to that rule I compare it to, which is agreement or disagreement. End of section 35. Recording by Lambda.
Section 36 of An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Malone. An Essay Concerning Human Understanding by John Locke. Chapter 29. Of clear and obscure, distinct and confused ideas. 1. Ideas come clear and distinct, others obscure and confused. Having shown the original of our ideas, and taken a view of their several sorts, considered the difference between the simple and the complex, and observed how the complex ones are divided into those of modes, substances, and relations, all which I think is necessary to be done by anyone who would acquaint himself thoroughly with the progress of the mind in its apprehension and knowledge of things. It will perhaps be thought I have dwelt long enough upon the examination of ideas. I must nevertheless crave leave to offer some few other considerations concerning them. The first is that some are clear and others obscure, some distinct and others confused. 2. Clear and obscure explained by sight. The perception of the mind, being most aptly explained by words relating to the sight, we shall best understand what is meant by clear and obscure in our ideas by reflecting on what we call clear and obscure in the objects of sight. Light being that which discovers to us visible objects, we give the name of obscure to that which is not placed in a light sufficient to discover minutely to us the figure and colors which are observable in it, and which, in a better light, would be discernible. In like manner, our simple ideas are clear when they are such as the objects themselves from whence they were taken did or might, in a well-ordered sensation or perception, present them. Whilst the memory retains them thus, and can produce them to the mind whenever it has occasion to consider them, they are clear ideas, so far as they either want anything of the original exactness, or have lost any of their first freshness, and are, as it were, faded or tarnished by time, so far are they obscure. Complex ideas, as they are made up of simple ones, so they are clear, when the ideas that go to their composition are clear, and the number and order of those simple ideas that are the ingredients of any complex one is determinate and certain. 3. Causes of obscurity. The causes of obscurity in simple ideas seem to be either dull organs or very slight and transient impressions made by the objects, or else a weakness in the memory, not able to retain them as received. For to return again to visible objects, to help us to apprehend this matter, if the organs or faculties of perception, like wax over-hardened with cold, will not receive the impression of the seal from the usual impulse wont to imprint it, or like wax of a temper too soft will not hold it well when well imprinted, or else supposing the wax of a temper fit, but the seal not applied with a sufficient force to make a clear impression, in any of these cases the print left by the seal will be obscure. This, I suppose, needs no application to make it plainer. 4. Distinct and confused. What? As a clear idea is that whereof the mind has such a full and evident perception, as it does receive from an outward object operating duly on a well-disposed organ, so a distinct idea is that wherein the mind perceives a difference from all other, and a confused idea is such an one as is not sufficiently distinguishable from another, from which it ought to be different. 5. Objection. If no idea be confused, but such as is not sufficiently distinguishable from another from which it should be different, it will be hard, may any one say, to find anywhere a confused idea. For let any idea be as it will, it can be no other but such as the mind perceives it to be, and that very perception sufficiently distinguishes it from all other ideas, which cannot be other, that is, different, without being perceived to be so. No idea, therefore, can be undistinguishable from another from which it ought to be different, unless you would have it different from itself, for from all other it is evidently different. 6. Confusion of ideas is in reference to their names. To remove this difficulty, and to help us to conceive aright what it is that makes the confusion ideas are at any time chargeable with, we must consider that things ranked under distinct names are supposed different enough to be distinguished, that so each sort by its peculiar name may be marked, and discoursed of, apart upon any occasion, and there's nothing more evident than that the greatest part of different names are supposed to stand for different things. Now every idea a man has, being visibly what it is, and distinct from all other ideas but itself, that which makes it confused is, when it is such that it may as well be called by another name as that which it is expressed by. The difference which keeps the things, to be ranked under those very different names, distinct, and makes some of them belong rather to one and some of them to the other of those names, being left out. And so the distinction, which was intended to be kept up by those different names, is quite lost. 7. Defaults which make this confusion. The defaults which usually occasion this confusion, I think, are chiefly these following. First, complex ideas made up of too few simple ones. First, when any complex idea, for it is complex ideas that are most liable to confusion, is made up of too small a number of simple ideas, and such only as are common to other things, whereby the differences that make it deserve a different name are left out. Thus, he that has an idea made up of barely the simple ones of a beast with spots has but a confused idea of a leopard, it not being thereby sufficiently distinguished from a lynx, and several other sorts of beasts that are spotted. So that such an idea, though it hath the peculiar name leopard, is not distinguishable from those designed by the names lynx or panther, and may as well come under the name lynx as leopard. How much the custom of defining of words by general terms contributes to make the ideas we would express by them confused and undetermined, I leave others to consider. This is evident, that confused ideas are such as render the use of words uncertain, and take away the benefit of distinct names. When the ideas, for which we use different names, have not a difference answerable to their distinct names, and so cannot be distinguished by them, there it is that they are truly confused. Secondly, or their simple ones jumbled disorderly together. Secondly, another fault which makes our ideas confused is when, though the particulars that make up any idea are in number enough, yet they are so jumbled together that it is not easily discernible whether it more belongs to the name that is given it than to any other. There is nothing properer to make us conceive this confusion than a sort of pictures, usually shown as surprising pieces of art, wherein the colours, as they are laid by the pencil on the table itself, mark out very odd and unusual figures, and have no discernible order in their position. This draught, thus made up of parts wherein no symmetry nor order appears, is in itself no more a confused thing than the picture of a cloudy sky, wherein, though there be as little order of colours or figures to be found, yet nobody thinks it a confused picture. What is it then that makes it be thought confused, since the want of symmetry does not? As it is plain it does not, for another draught made barely in imitation of this could not be called confused. I answer, that which makes it be thought confused is the applying it to some name to which it does no more discernibly belong than to some other, that is, when it is said to be the picture of a man or Caesar, then anyone with reason counts it confused, because it is not discernible in that state to belong more to the name man or Caesar than to the name baboon or Pompey, which are supposed to stand for different ideas from those signified by man or Caesar. But when a cylindrical mirror, placed right, had reduced those irregular lines in the table into their due order and proportion, then the confusion ceases, and the eye presently sees that it is a man or Caesar, that is, that it belongs to those names, and that it is sufficiently distinguishable from a baboon or Pompey, i.e., from the ideas signified by those names. Just thus it is with our ideas, which are, as it were, the pictures of things. No one of these mental drafts, however the parts are put together, can be called confused, for they are plainly discernible as they are, till it be ranked under some ordinary name to which it cannot be discerned to belong, any more than it does to some other name of an allowed different signification. 9. Thirdly, or their simple ones, mutable and undetermined. Thirdly, a third defect that frequently gives the name of confused to our ideas is, when any one of them is uncertain and undetermined. Thus we may observe men who, not forbearing to use the ordinary words of their language till they have learned their precise signification, change the idea they make this or that term stand for, almost as often as they use it. He that does this out of uncertainty of what he should leave out or put into his idea of church or idolatry, every time he thinks of either, and holds not steady to any one precise combination of ideas that makes it up, is said to have a confused idea of idolatry or the church, though this be still for the same reason as the former, namely, because a mutable idea, if we will allow it to be one idea, cannot belong to one name rather than another, and so loses the distinction that distinct names are designed for. 10. Confusion without reference to names, hardly conceivable. By what has been said, we may observe how much names, as supposed steady signs of things, and by their difference to stand for, and keep things distinct that in themselves are different, are the occasion of denominating ideas distinct or confused by a secret and unobserved reference the mind makes of its ideas to such names. This perhaps will be fuller understood after what I say of words in the third book has been read and considered. But without taking notice of such a reference of ideas to distinct names, as the signs of distinct things, it will be hard to say what a confused idea is, and therefore when a man designs by any name a sort of things, or any one particular thing, distinct from all others, the complex idea he annexes to that name is the more distinct, the more particular the ideas are, and the greater and more determinate the number and order of them is, whereof it is made up. For the more it has of these, the more it has still of the perceivable differences, whereby it is kept separate and distinct from all ideas belonging to other names, even those that approach nearest to it, and thereby all confusion with them is avoided. 11. Confusion concerns always two ideas. Confusion, making it a difficulty to separate two things that should be separated, concerns always two ideas, and those which most approach one another. Whenever, therefore, we suspect any idea to be confused, we must examine what other it is in danger to be confused with, or which it cannot easily be separated from, and that will always be found an idea belonging to another name, and so should be a different thing, from which yet it is not sufficiently distinct, being either the same with it, or making a part of it, or at least as properly called by that name as the other it is ranked under, and so keeps not that difference from that other idea which the different names import. 12. Causes of confused ideas. This, I think, is the confusion proper to ideas, which still carries with it a secret reference to names. At least, if there be any other confusion of ideas, this is that which most of all disorders men's thoughts and discourses. Ideas, as ranked under names, being those that for the most part men reason of within themselves, and always those which they commune about with others. And therefore, where there are supposed two different ideas marked by two different names, which are not as distinguishable as the sounds that stand for them, there never fails to be confusion, and where any ideas are distinct as the ideas of these two sounds they are marked by, there can be between them no confusion. The way to prevent it is to collect and unite into one complex idea, as precisely as is possible, all those ingredients whereby it is differenced from others, and to them, so united in a determinate number and order, apply steadily the same name. But this neither accommodating men's ease or vanity, nor serving any design but that of naked truth, which is not always the thing aimed at, such exactness is rather to be wished than hoped for. And since the loose application of names to undetermined, variable, and almost no ideas serves both to cover our own ignorance as well as to perplex and confound others, which goes for learning and superiority in knowledge, it is no wonder that most men should use it themselves, whilst they complain of it in others. Though I think no small part of the confusion to be found in the notions of men might, by care and ingenuity, be avoided, yet I am far from concluding it everywhere wilful. Some ideas are so complex, and made up of so many parts, that the memory does not easily retain the very same precise combination of simple ideas under one name. Much less are we able constantly to divine for what precise complex idea such a name stands in another man's use of it. From the first of these follows confusion in a man's own reasonings and opinions within himself. From the latter, frequent confusion in discoursing and arguing with others. But having more at large treated of words, their defects and abuses in the following book, I shall here say no more of it. 13. Complex ideas may be distinct in one part and confused in another. Our complex ideas, being made up of collections, and so variety of simple ones, may accordingly be very clear and distinct in one part, and very obscure and confused in another. In a man who speaks of a chiliedron, or a body of 1,000 sides, the ideas of the figure may be very confused, though that of the number be very distinct, so that he, being able to discourse and demonstrate concerning that part of his complex idea which depends upon the number of 1,000, he is apt to think he has a distinct idea of a chiliedron, Though it be plain he has no precise idea of its figure, so as to distinguish it by that from one that has 999 sides, the not observing whereof causes no small error in men's thoughts and confusion in their discourses. 14. This, if not heeded, causes confusion in our arguings. He that thinks he has a distinct idea of the figure of a chiliadron, let him for trial's sake take another parcel of the same uniform matter, namely gold or wax of an equal bulk, and make it into a figure of 999 sides. He will, I doubt not, be able to distinguish these two ideas one from another by the number of sides, and reason and argue distinctly about them, whilst he keeps his thoughts and reasoning to that part only of these ideas which is contained in their numbers, as that the sides of the one could be divided into two equal numbers, and of the others not, and so on. But when he goes about to distinguish them by their figure, he will there be presently at a loss, and not able, I think, to frame in his mind two ideas, one of them distinct from the other, by the bare figure of these two pieces of gold, as he could if the same parcels of gold were made into a cube, the other a figure of 5 sides, in which incomplete ideas we are very apt to impose on ourselves and wrangle with others, especially where they have particular and familiar names. For, being satisfied in that part of the idea which we have clear, and the name which is familiar to us, being applied to the whole, containing that part also which is imperfect and obscure, we are apt to use it for that confused part, and draw deductions from it in the obscure part of its signification, as confidently as we do from the other. 15. Instance in eternity. Having frequently in our minds the name eternity, we are apt to think we have a positive, comprehensive idea of it, which is as much as to say that there is no part of that duration which is not clearly contained in our idea. It is true that he that thinks so may have a clear idea of duration. He may also have a clear idea of a very great length of duration. He may also have a clear idea of the comparison of that great one with still a greater, but it not being possible for him to include in his idea of any duration, let it be as great as it will, the whole extent together of a duration where he supposes no end. That part of his idea, which is still beyond the bounds of that large duration he represents to his own thoughts, is very obscure and undetermined, and hence it is that in disputes and reasoning concerning eternity, or any other infinite, we are very apt to blunder, and involve ourselves in manifest absurdities. 16. Infinite divisibility of matter. In matter we have no clear ideas of the smallness of parts much beyond the smallest that occur to any of our senses, and therefore when we talk of the divisibility of matter in infinitum, though we have clear ideas of division and divisibility, and have also clear ideas of parts made out of a whole by division, yet we have but very obscure and confused ideas of corpuscles or minute bodies, so to be divided when by former division they are reduced to a smallness much exceeding the perception of any of our senses. And so all that we have clear and distinct ideas of is of what division in general or abstractly is, and the relation of totem and pars, but of the bulk of the body, to be thus infinitely divided after certain progressions, I think we have no clear nor distinct idea at all. For I ask anyone, whether, taking the smallest atom of dust he ever saw, he has any distinct idea, bating still the number, which concerns not extension, betwixt the 100,000th and the 1,000,000th part of it, or if he thinks he can refine his ideas to that degree without losing sight of them. Let him add 10 ciphers to each of these numbers. Such a degree of smallness is not unreasonable to be supposed, since a division carried on so far brings it no nearer the end of infinite division than the first division into 2 halves does. I must confess, for my part, I have no clear distinct ideas of the different bulk or extension of those bodies, having but a very obscure one of either of them, so that I think when we talk of division of bodies in infinitum, our idea of their distinct bulks, which is the subject and foundation of division, comes, after a little progression, to be confounded and almost lost in obscurity. For that idea, which is to represent only bigness, must be very obscure and confused, which we cannot distinguish from one 10 times as big, but only by number. So that we have clear distinct ideas, we may say, of 10 and 1, but no distinct idea of 2 such extensions. It is plain from hence that when we talk of infinite divisibility, of body or extension, our distinct and clear ideas are only of numbers, but the clear distinct ideas of extension after some progress of division are quite lost, and of such minute parts we have no distinct ideas at all. But it returns, as all our ideas of infinite do, at last to that of number, always to be added, but thereby never amounts to any distinct idea of actual infinite parts. We have, it is true, a clear idea of division as often as we think of it, but thereby we have no more clear idea of infinite parts in matter than we have a clear idea of an infinite number, by being able still to add new numbers to my assigned numbers we have. Endless divisibility giving us no more clear and distinct idea of actually infinite parts than endless addability, if I may so speak, gives us a clear and distinct idea of an actually infinite number, they both being only in a power still of increasing the number, be it already as great as it will. So that of what remains to be added, wherein consists the infinity, we have but an obscure, imperfect, and confused idea, from or about which we can argue or reason with a certainty or clearness no more than we can in arithmetic about a number of which we have no such distinct idea as we have of 4 or 100, but only this relative obscure one, that, compared to any other, it is still bigger, and we have no more clear positive idea of it when we dropped line, than if we should say it is bigger than 40 or 4 to 400 million, having no nearer a proportion to the end of addition or number than 4. For he that adds only 4 to 4, and so proceeds, shall as soon come to the end of all addition as he that adds 400 million to 400 million. And so likewise in eternity, he that has an idea of but 4 years has as much a positive, complete idea of eternity as he that has one of 400 million of years, for what remains of eternity beyond either of these 2 numbers of years is as clear to the one as the other, that is, neither of them has any clear positive idea of it at all. For he that adds only 4 years to 4, and so on, shall as soon reach eternity as he that adds 400 million of years, and so on, or, if he please, doubles the increase as often as he will, the remaining abyss being still as far beyond the end of all these progressions as if it is from the length of a day or an hour. For nothing finite bears any proportion to infinite, and therefore our ideas, which are all finite, cannot bear any. Thus it is also in our idea of extension, when we increase it by addition, as well as when we diminish it by division, and would enlarge our thoughts to infinite space. After a few doublings of these ideas of extension, which are the largest we are accustomed to have, we lose the clear distinct idea of that space. It becomes a confusedly great one, with a surplus of still greater, about which, when we would argue or reason, we shall always find ourselves at a loss. Confused ideas in our arguings, and deductions from that part of them which is confused, always leading us into confusion. End of section 36. Reading by Malone.
Section 38 of an essay concerning human understanding. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Savannah Allday. An essay concerning human understanding by John Locke, Chapter 30. Of real and fantastical ideas. Number 1. Ideas considered in reference to their archetypes. Besides what we have already mentioned concerning ideas, other considerations belong to them in reference to things from whence they are taken, or which they may be supposed to represent, and thus, I think, they may come under a threefold distinction, and are, first, either real or fantastical, secondly, adequate or inadequate, thirdly, true or false. First, by real ideas, I mean such as have a foundation in nature, such as have a conformity with the real being and existence of things or with their archetypes. Fantastical or chimerical, I call such as have no foundation in nature, nor have any conformity with that reality of being to which they are tactically referred as to their archetypes. If we examine the several sorts of ideas before mentioned, we shall find that, number 2, simple ideas are all real appearances of things. First, our simple ideas are all real, all agree to the reality of things. Not that they are all of them the images or representations of what does exist, the contrary whereof, and all but the primary qualities of bodies, have been already shown. But though whiteness and coldness are no more in snow than pain is, yet those ideas of whiteness and coldness, pain and company, being in us the effects of powers and things without us, ordained by our Maker to produce in us such sensations, there are real ideas in us, whereby we distinguish the qualities that are really in things themselves. For these several appearances being designed to be the mark whereby we are to know and distinguish things which we have to do with, our ideas do as well serve us to that purpose, and are as real distinguishing characters, whether they be only constant effects, or else exact resemblances of something in the things themselves, the reality lying in that steady correspondence they have with the distinct constitutions of real beings. But whether they answer to those constitutions as to causes or patterns, it matters not. It suffices that they are constantly produced by them. And thus our simple ideas are all real and true, because they answer and agree to those powers of things which produce them on our minds, that being all that is requisite to make them real, and not fictions at pleasure. For in simple ideas, as has been shown, the mind is wholly confined to the operation of things upon it, and can make to itself no simple idea more than what it was received. Number 3. Complex ideas are voluntary combinations. Though the mind be wholly passive in respect of its simple ideas, yet I think we may say it is not so in respect of its complex ideas, For those being combinations of simple ideas put together and united under one general name, it is plain that the mind of man uses some kind of liberty in forming those complex ideas. How else comes it to pass that one man's idea of gold or justice is different from another's, but because he has put in or left out of his some simple idea which the other has not? The question then is, which of these are real, and which barely imaginary combinations? What collections agree to the reality of things, and what not? And to this I say that, 4. Mixed modes and relations made of consistent ideas are real. Secondly, mixed modes and relations, having no other reality but what they have in the minds of men, there is nothing more required to this kind of ideas to make them real, but that they be so framed that there be a possibility of existing conformable to them. These ideas themselves, being archetypes, cannot differ from their archetypes, and so cannot be chimerical, unless anyone would jumble together in them inconsistent ideas. Indeed, as any of them have the names of a known language assigned to them, by which he that has them in his mind would signify them to others, so bare possibility of existing is not enough. They must have a conformity to the ordinary signification of the name that is given them, that they may not be thought fantastical, as if a man would give the name of justice to that idea which common use calls liberality. But this fantasticalness relates more to propriety of speech than reality of ideas. For a man to be undisturbed in danger, sedately to consider what is fittest to be done, and to execute it steadily, is the mixed mode, or complex idea of an action which may exist. But to be undisturbed in danger, without using one's reason or industry, is what is also possible to be, and so is as real an idea as the other. Though the first of these, having the name courage given to it, may in respect to that name be a right or wrong idea, but the other, whilst it has not a common received name of any known language assigned to it, is not capable of any deformity, being made with no reference to anything but itself. 5. Complex ideas of substances are real, when they agree with the existence of things. Thirdly, our complex ideas of substances, being made all of them in reference to things existing without us, and intended to be representations of substances as they really are no further real than as they are such combinations of simple ideas as are really united, and coexist in things without us. On the contrary, those are fantastical which are made up of such collections of simple ideas as were really never united, never were found together in any substance, v.g. a rational creature consisting of a horse's head, joined to a body of human shape, or such as the centaurs are described, or a body yellow, very malleable, fusible, and fixed, but lighter than common water, or an uniform organized body, consisting as to sense, all of similar parts, with perception and voluntary motion joined to it. Whether such substances as these can possibly exist or no, it is probable we do not know. But be that as it will, these ideas of substances, being made conformable to no pattern existing that we know, and consisting of such collections ideas as no substance ever showed as united together, they ought to pass with us for barely imaginary, but much more those complex ideas so which contain in them any inconsistency or contradictions of their parts. End of section 37. Recording by Savannah all day.
Section 38 of An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Malone. An Essay Concerning Human Understanding by John Locke. Chapter 31 of Adequate and Inadequate Ideas. 1. Adequate ideas are such as perfectly represent their archetypes. Of our real ideas, some are adequate and some are inadequate. Those I call adequate, which perfectly represent those archetypes which the mind supposes them taken from, which it intends them to stand for, and to which it refers them. Inadequate ideas are such which are but a partial or incomplete representation of those archetypes to which they are referred. upon which account it is plain. 2. Adequate ideas are such as perfectly represent their archetypes. Simple ideas, all adequate. First, that all our simple ideas are adequate, because, being nothing but the effects of certain powers in things, fitted and ordained by God to produce such sensations in us, they cannot but be correspondent and adequate to those powers, and we are sure they agree to the reality of things. For if sugar produce in us the ideas which we call whiteness and sweetness, we are sure there is a power in sugar to produce those ideas in our minds, or else they could not have been produced by it. And so each sensation answering the power that operates on any of our senses, the idea so produced is a real idea, and not a fiction of the mind, which has no power to produce any simple idea, and cannot but be adequate, since it ought only to answer that power. And so all simple ideas are adequate. It is true, the things producing in us these simple ideas are but few of them denominated by us, as if they were only the causes of them, but as if those ideas were real beings in them. For, though fire be called painful to the touch, whereby is signified the power of producing in us the idea of pain, yet it is denominated also light and hot, as if light and heat were really something in the fire, more than a power to excite these ideas in us, and therefore are called qualities in or of the fire. But these being nothing in truth but powers to excite such ideas in us, I must in that sense be understood. When I speak of secondary qualities as being in things, or of their ideas as being the objects that excite them in us, such ways of speaking, though accommodated to the vulgar notions, without which one cannot be well understood, yet truly signify nothing but those powers which are in things to excite certain sensations or ideas in us. Since were no fit organs to receive the impressions fire makes on the sight and touch, nor a mind joined to those organs to receive the ideas of light and heat by those impressions from the fire or sun, there would yet be no more light or heat in the world than there would be pain if there were no sensible creature to feel it, though the sun should continue just as it is now, and Mount Etna flame higher than ever it did. Solidity and extension and the termination of it, figure, with motion and rest, whereof we have the ideas, would be really in the world as they are, whether there were any sensible being to perceive them or no. And therefore we have reason to look on those as the real modifications of matter, and such as are the exciting causes of all our various sensations from bodies. But this being an inquiry not belonging to this place, I shall enter no further into it, but proceed to show what complex ideas are adequate and what not. 3. Modes are all adequate. Secondly, our complex ideas of modes, being voluntary collections of simple ideas, which the mind puts together without reference to any real archetypes or standing patterns existing anywhere, are and cannot but be adequate ideas, because they, not being intended for copies of things really existing, but for archetypes made by the mind to rank and denominate things by, cannot want anything, they having each of them that combination of ideas, and thereby that perfection which the mind intended they should, so that the mind acquiesces in them, and can find nothing wanting. Thus, by having the idea of a figure with 3 sides meeting at 3 angles, I have a complete idea, wherein I require nothing else to make it perfect. That the mind is satisfied with the perfection of this its idea is plain, in that it does not conceive that any understanding hath, or can have, a more complete or perfect idea of that thing it signifies by the word triangle, supposing it to exist, than itself has in that complex idea of 3 sides and 3 angles, in which is contained all that is or can be essential to it, or necessary to complete it, wherever or however it exists. But in our ideas of substances it is otherwise, for there, desiring to copy things as they really do exist, and to represent to ourselves that constitution on which all their properties depend, we perceive our ideas attain not that perfection we intend, for we find they still want something we should be glad were in them, and so are all inadequate. But mixed modes and relations, being archetypes without patterns, and so having nothing to represent but themselves, cannot but be adequate, everything being so to itself. He that at first put together the idea of danger perceived, absence of disorder from fear, sedate consideration of what was justly to be done, and executing that without disturbance or being deterred by the danger of it, had certainly in his mind that complex idea made up of that combination, and intending it to be nothing else but what it is, nor to have in it any other simple ideas but what it hath, it could not also but be an adequate idea, and laying this up in his memory, with the name courage annexed to it, to signify to others, and denominate from thence any action he should observe to agree with it, had thereby a standard to measure and denominate actions by, as they agreed to it. This idea, thus made and laid up for a pattern, must necessarily be adequate, being referred to nothing else but itself, nor made by any other original but the good liking and will of him that first made this combination. 4. Modes in reference to settled names may be inadequate. Indeed, another coming after, and in conversation learning from him the word courage, may make an idea, to which he gives the name courage, different from what the first author applied it to, and has in his mind when he uses it. And in this case, if he designs that his idea in thinking should be conformable to the other's idea, as the name he uses in speaking is conformable in sound to his from whom he learned it, his idea may be very wrong and inadequate, because in this case, making the other man's idea the pattern of his idea in thinking, as the other man's word or sound is the pattern of his in speaking, his idea is so far defective and inadequate as it is distant from the archetype and pattern he refers it to, and intends to express and signify by the name he uses for it, which name he would have to be a sign of the other man's idea, to which in its proper use it is primarily annexed, and of his own as agreeing to it, to which if his own does not exactly correspond, it is faulty and inadequate. 5. Because then means in propriety of speech to correspond to the ideas in some other mind. Therefore, these complex ideas of modes, which they are referred by the mind, and intended to correspond to the ideas in the mind of some other intelligent being, expressed by the names we apply to them, they may be very deficient, wrong, and inadequate, because they agree not to that which the mind designs to be their archetype and pattern, in which respect only an idea of modes can be wrong, imperfect, or inadequate, and on this account our ideas of mixed modes are the most liable to be faulty of any other. But this refers more to proper speaking than knowing right. 16. Ideas of substances as referred to real essences, not adequate. Thirdly, what ideas we have of substances I have above shown. Now, those ideas have in the mind a double reference. 1. Sometimes they are referred to a supposed real essence of each species of things. 2. Sometimes they are only designed to be pictures and representations in the mind of things that do exist, by ideas of those qualities that are discoverable in them. In both which ways these copies of those originals and archetypes are imperfect and inadequate. First, it is usual for men to make the names of substances stand for things as supposed to have certain real essences, whereby they are of this or that species, and names standing for nothing but the ideas that are in men's minds, they must constantly refer their ideas to such real essences as to their archetypes. That men, especially such as have been bred up in the learning taught in this part of the world, do suppose certain specific essences of substances, which each individual, in its several kinds, is made conformable to and partakes of, is so far from needing proof that it will be thought strange if anyone should do otherwise, and thus they ordinarily apply the specific names they rank particular substances under to things as distinguished by such specific real essences. Who is there almost who would not take it amiss if it should be doubted whether he called himself a man, with any other meaning than as having the real essence of a man? And yet, if you demand what those real essences are, it is plain men are ignorant, and know them not, from whence it follows that the ideas they have in their minds, being referred to real essences as to archetypes which are unknown, must be so far from being adequate that they cannot be supposed to be any representation of them at all. The complex ideas we have of substances are, as it has been shown, certain collections of simple ideas that have been observed or supposed constantly to exist together. But such a complex idea cannot be the real essence of any substance, for then the properties we discover in that body would depend on that complex idea, and be deducible from it, and their necessary connection with it be known, as all properties of a triangle depend on, and, as far as they are discoverable, are deducible from the complex idea of three lines, including a space. But it is plain that in our complex ideas of substances are not contained such ideas on which all the other qualities that are to be found in them do depend. The common idea men have of iron is a body of a certain color, weight, and hardness, and a property that they look on as belonging to it is malleableness. But yet this property has no necessary connection with that complex idea, or any part of it, and there is no more reason to think that malleableness depends on that color, weight, and hardness, than that color or that weight depends on its malleableness. And yet Though we know nothing of these real essences, there is nothing more ordinary than that men should attribute the sorts of things to such essences. The particular parcel of matter, which makes the ring I have on my finger, is forwardly by most men supposed to have a real essence, whereby it is gold, and from whence those qualities flow which I find in it, namely, its peculiar color, weight, hardness, fusibility, fixedness, and change of color upon a slight touch of mercury, and so on. This essence, from which all these properties flow, when I inquire into it and search after it, I plainly perceive I cannot discover. The furthest I can go is only to presume that, it being nothing but body, its real essence or internal constitution, on which these qualities depend, can be nothing but the figure, size, and connection of its solid parts, of neither of which, having any distinct perception at all, can I have any idea of its essence, which is the cause that it has that particular shining yellowness, a greater weight than anything I know of the same bulk, and a fitness to have its color changed by the touch of quicksilver. If any one will say that the real essence and internal constitution, on which these properties depend, is not the figure, size, arrangement, or connection of its solid parts, but something else, called its particular form, I am further from having any idea of its real essence than I was before. For I have an idea of figure, size, and situation of solid parts in general, though I have none of the particular figure, size, or putting together of parts, whereby the qualities above mentioned are produced, which qualities I find in that particular parcel of matter that is on my finger, and not in any other parcel of matter with which I cut the pen I write with. But when I am told that something besides the figure, size, and posture of the solid parts of that body in its essence, something called substantial form, of that I confess I have no idea at all, but only of the sound form, which is far enough from an idea of its real essence or connection. Like the ignorance as I have of the real essence of this particular substance, I have also of the real essence of all other natural ones, of which essences, I confess, I have no distinct ideas at all, and I am apt to suppose others, when they examine their own knowledge, will find in themselves, in this one point, the same sort of ignorance. 7. Because men know not the real essence of substances. Now then, when men apply to this particular parcel of matter on my finger a general name already in use, and denominate it gold, do they not ordinarily, or are they not understood to give it that name, as belonging to a particular species of bodies, having a real internal essence, by having of which essence this particular substance comes to be of that species, and to be called by that name? If it be so, as it is plain it is, the name by which things are marked as having that essence must be referred primarily to that essence, and consequently the idea to which that name is given must be referred also to that essence, and be intended to represent it. Which essence, since they who so use the names know not, their ideas of substances must be all inadequate in that respect, as not containing in them that real essence which the mind intends they should. 8. Ideas of substances, when regarded as collections of their qualities, are all inadequate. Secondly, those who, neglecting that useless supposition of unknown real essences, whereby they are distinguished, endeavor to copy the substances that exist in the world by putting together the ideas of those sensible qualities which are found coexisting in them, though they come much nearer a likeness of them than those who imagine they know not what real specific essences, yet they arrive not at perfectly adequate ideas of those substances they would thus copy into their minds. Nor do those copies exactly and fully contain all that is to be found in their archetypes, because those qualities and powers of substances, whereof we make their complex ideas, are so many and various that no man's complex idea contains them all. That our complex ideas of substances do not contain in them all the simple ideas that are united in the things themselves is evident in that men do rarely put into their complex idea of any substance all the simple ideas they do know to exist in it, because, endeavoring to make the signification of their names as clear and as little cumbersome as they can, they make their specific ideas of the sorts of substance, for the most part, of a few of those simple ideas which are to be found in them. But these having no original precedency or right to be put in, and make the specific idea more than others that are left out, it is plain that both these ways our ideas of substances are deficient and inadequate. The simple ideas, whereof we make our complex ones of substances, are all of them, bating only the figure and bulk of some sorts, powers, which, being relations to other substances, we can never be sure that we know all the powers that are in any one body, till we have tried what changes it is fitted to give to or receive from other substances in their several ways of application, which being impossible to be tried upon any one body, much less upon all, it is impossible we should have adequate ideas of any substance made up of a collection of all its properties. 9. Their powers usually make up our complex ideas of substances. Whosoever first lighted on a parcel of that sort of substance we denote by the word gold, could not rationally take the bulk and figure he observed in that lump to depend on its real essence or internal constitution. Therefore, those never went into his idea of that species of body, but its peculiar color, perhaps, and weight were the first he abstracted from it to make the complex idea of that species, which both are but powers, the one to affect our eyes after such a manner, and to produce in us that idea we call yellow, and the other to force upwards any other body of equal bulk, they being put into a pair of equal scales, one against another. Another perhaps added to these the ideas of fusibility and fixedness, two other passive powers in relation to the operation of fire upon it. Another, its ductility and solubility in aqua regia, two other powers relating to the operation of other bodies in changing its outward figure or separation of it into insensible parts. These, or parts of these, put together, usually make the complex idea in men's minds of that sort of body we call gold. 10. Substances have innumerable powers not contained in our complex ideas of them. But no one who hath considered the properties of bodies in general, or this sort in particular, can doubt that this, called gold, has infinite other properties not contained in that complex idea. Some who have examined this species more accurately could, I believe, enumerate 10 times as many properties in gold, all of them as inseparable from its internal constitution as its color or weight. And it is probable, if anyone knew all the properties that are by divers men known of this metal, there would be 100 times as many ideas go to the complex idea of gold as any one man yet has in his. And yet perhaps that not be the 1,000th part of what is to be discovered in it. The changes that one body is apt to receive, and make in other bodies, upon a due application, exceeding far not only what we know, but what we are apt to imagine, which will not appear so much a paradox to anyone who will but consider how far men are yet from knowing all the properties of that one, no very compound figure, a triangle, though it be no small number that are already by mathematicians discovered of it. 11. Ideas of substances, being got only by collecting their qualities, are all inadequate. So that all our complex ideas of substances are imperfect and inadequate, which would be so also in mathematical figures, if we were to have our complex ideas of them only by collecting their properties in reference to other figures. How uncertain and imperfect would our ideas be of an ellipsis if we had no other idea of it but some few of its properties, whereas, having in our plain idea the whole essence of that figure, we from thence discover those properties and demonstratively see how they flow and are inseparable from it. 12. Simple ideas, word in Greek, and adequate. Thus the mind has 3 sorts of abstract ideas or nominal essences. First, simple ideas, which are, word in Greek, or copies, but yet certainly adequate, because, being intended to express nothing but the power in things to produce in the mind such a sensation, that sensation, when it is produced, cannot but be the effect of that power. So the paper I write on, having the power in the light, I speak according to the common notion of light, to produce in men the sensation which I call white, it cannot but be the effect of such a power in something without the mind, since the mind has not the power to produce any such idea in itself, and being meant for nothing else but the effect of such a power, that simple idea is, words missing, the sensation of white in my mind, being the effect of that power which is in the paper to produce it, is perfectly adequate to that power, or else that power would produce a different idea. 13. Ideas of substances are ekthepa and inadequate. Secondly, the complex ideas of substances are ektypes, copies too, but not perfect ones, not adequate, which is very evident to the mind in that it plainly perceives that whatever collection of simple ideas it makes of any substance that exists, it cannot be sure that it exactly answers all that are in that substance, since, not having tried all the operations of all other substances upon it, and found all the alterations it would receive from or cause in other substances, it cannot have an exact, adequate collection of all its active and passive capacities, and so not have an adequate complex idea of the powers of any substance existing and its relations, which is that sort of complex idea of substances we have. And, after all, if we would have, and actually had, in our complex idea, an exact collection of all the secondary qualities or powers of any substance, we should not yet thereby have an idea of the essence of that thing. For, since the powers or qualities that are observable by us are not the real essence of that substance, but depend on it and flow from it, any collection whatsoever of these qualities cannot be the real essence of that thing, whereby it is plain that our ideas of substances are not adequate, are not what the mind intends them to be. Besides, a man has no idea of substance in general, nor knows what substance is in itself. 14. Ideas of modes and relations are archetypes, and cannot be adequate. Thirdly, complex ideas of modes and relations are originals, and archetypes are not copies, nor made after the pattern of any real existence, to which the mind intends them to be conformable, and exactly to answer. These being such collections of simple ideas that the mind itself puts together, and such collections that each of them contains in it precisely all that the mind intends that it should, they are archetypes and essences of modes that may exist, and so are designed only for, and belong only to, such modes as, when they do exist, have an exact conformity with those complex ideas. The ideas, therefore, of modes and relations cannot but be inadequate. End of section 38. Reading by Malone. Section 39 of an essay concerning human understanding. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Malone. An essay concerning human understanding by John Locke. Chapter 32 of True and False Ideas. 1. Truth and falsehood properly belong to propositions, not to ideas. Though truth and falsehood belong, in propriety of speech, only to propositions, yet ideas are ofttimes termed true or false, as what words are there that are not used with great latitude, and with some deviation from their strict and proper significations. Though I think that when ideas themselves are termed true or false, there is still some secret or tacit proposition, which is the foundation of that denomination. As we shall see, if we examine the particular occasions wherein they come to be called true or false, in all which we shall find some kind of affirmation or negation, which is the reason of that determination. For our ideas, being nothing but bare appearances or perceptions in our minds, cannot properly and simply in themselves be said to be true or false, no more than a single name of anything can be said to be true or false. 2. Ideas and words may be said to be true, inasmuch as they are really ideas and words. Indeed, both ideas and words may be said to be true, in a metaphysical sense of the word truth, as all other things that anyway exist are said to be true, that is, really to be such as they exist. Though in things called true, even in that sense, there is perhaps a secret reference to our ideas, looked upon as the standards of that truth, which amounts to a mental proposition, though it be usually not taken notice of. 3. No idea, as an appearance in the mind, either true or false. But it is not in that metaphysical sense of truth, which we inquire here, when we examine whether our ideas are capable of being true or false, but in the more ordinary acceptation of those words. And so I say that the ideas in our minds, being only so many perceptions or appearances there, none of them are false. The idea of a centaur having no more falsehood in it when it appears in our minds than the name centaur has falsehood in it when it is pronounced by our mouths or written on paper. For truth or falsehood, lying always in some affirmation or negation, mental or verbal, our ideas are not capable of any of them of being false, till the mind passes some judgment on them, that is, affirms or denies something of them. 4. Ideas referred to anything extraneous to them may be true or false. Whenever the mind refers any of its ideas to anything extraneous to them, they are then capable to be called true or false, because the mind, in such a reference, makes a tacit supposition of their conformity to that thing, which supposition, as it happens to be true or false, so the ideas themselves come to be denominated. The most usual cases wherein this happens are these following. 5. Other men's ideas, real existence, and supposed real essences are what men usually refer their ideas to. First, when the mind supposes any idea it has conformable to that in other men's minds, called by the same common name, namely when the mind intends or judges its ideas of justice, temperance, religion, to be the same with what other men give these names to. Secondly, when the mind supposes any idea it has in itself to be conformable to some real existence. Thus the two ideas of a man and a centaur, supposed to be the ideas of real substances, are the one true and the other false, the one having a conformity to what has really existed, the other not. Thirdly, when the mind refers any of its ideas to that real constitution and essence of anything, whereon all its properties depend, and thus the greatest part, if not all our ideas of substances, are false. 6. The cause of such reference. These suppositions the mind is very apt tacitly to make concerning its own ideas. But yet, if we will examine it, we shall find it is chiefly, if not only, concerning its abstract, complex ideas. For the natural tendency of the mind being towards knowledge, and finding that if it should proceed by and dwell upon only particular things, its progress would be very slow, and its work endless. Therefore, to shorten its way to knowledge and make each perception more comprehensive, the first thing it does, as the foundation of the easier enlarging its knowledge, either by contemplation of the things themselves that it would know, or conference with others about them, is to bind them into bundles and rank them so into sorts, that what knowledge it gets of any of them it may thereby, with assurance, extend to all of that sort, and so advance by larger steps in that which is its great business, knowledge. This, as I have elsewhere shown, is the reason why we collect things under comprehensive ideas, with names annexed to them, into genera and species, that is, into kinds and sorts. 7. Names of things supposed to carry in them knowledge of their essences. If, therefore, we will warily attend to the motions of the mind, and observe what course it usually takes in its way to knowledge, we shall, I think, find that the mind, having got an idea which it thinks may have use of either in contemplation or discourse, the first thing it does is to abstract it, and then get a name to it, and so lay it up in its storehouse. The memory, as containing the essence of a sort of things, of which that name is always to be the mark. Hence it is that we may often observe that when anyone sees a new thing of a kind that he knows not, he presently asks what it is, meaning by that inquiry nothing but the name, as if the name carried with it the knowledge of the species or the essence of it, whereof it is indeed used as the mark, and is generally supposed annexed to it. 8. How men suppose that their ideas must correspond to things, and to the customary meanings of names. But this abstract idea, being something in the mind, between the thing that exists and the name that is given to it, it is in our ideas that both the rightness of our knowledge and the propriety and intelligibleness of our speaking consists, and hence it is that men are so forward to suppose that the abstract ideas they have in their minds are such as agree to the things existing without them, to which they are referred, and are the same also to which the names they give them do by the use and propriety of that language belong. For without this double conformity of their ideas, they find that they should both think amiss of things in themselves, and talk of them unintelligibly to others. 9. Simple ideas may be false, in reference to others of the same name, but are least liable to be so. First, then, I say that when the truth of our ideas is judged of by the conformity they have to the ideas which other men have, and commonly signify by the same name, they may be any of them false. But yet simple ideas are least of all liable to be so mistaken, because a man, by his senses and every day's observation, may easily satisfy himself what the simple ideas are, which their several names that are in common use stand for, they being but few in number, and such as, if he doubts or mistakes in, he may easily rectify by the objects they are to be found in. Therefore, it is seldom that any one mistakes in his names of simple ideas, or applies the name red to the idea green, or the name sweet to the idea bitter. Much less are men apt to confound the names of ideas belonging to different senses, and call a colour by the name of a taste, and so on. Whereby it is evident that the simple ideas they call by any name are commonly the same that others have, and mean when they use the same names. 10. Ideas of mixed modes most liable to be false in this sense. Complex ideas are much more liable to be false in this respect, and the complex ideas of mixed modes much more than those of substances, because in substances, especially those which the common and unborrowed names of any language are applied to, some remarkable sensible qualities, serving ordinarily to distinguish one sort from another, easily preserve those who take any care in the use of their words from applying them to sorts of substances to which they do not at all belong. But in mixed modes we are much more uncertain, it being not so easy to determine of several actions whether they are to be called justice or cruelty, liberality or prodigality, And so in referring our ideas to those of other men, called by the same names, ours may be false, and the idea in our minds, which we express by the word justice, may perhaps be that which ought to have another name. 11. Or at least to be thought false. But whether or no our ideas of mixed modes are more liable than any sort to be different from those of other men, which are marked by the same names, this at least is certain, that this sort of falsehood is much more familiarly attributed to our ideas of mixed modes than to any other. When a man is thought to have a false idea of justice, or gratitude, or glory, it is for no other reason but that his agrees not with the ideas which each of those names are the signs of in other men. 12. And why? The reason whereof seems to me to be this, that the abstract ideas of mixed modes, being men's voluntary combinations of such a precise collection of simple ideas, and so the essence of each species being made by men alone, whereof we have no other sensible standard existing anywhere but the name itself, or the definition of that name, we, having nothing else to refer these our ideas of mixed modes to, as a standard to which we would conform them, but the ideas of those who are thought to use those names in their most proper significations, and so as our ideas conform or differ from them, they pass for true or false. And thus much concerning the truth and falsehood of our ideas in reference to their names. 13. As referred to real existence, none of our ideas can be false, but those of substances. Secondly, as to the truth and falsehood of our ideas in reference to the real existence of things, when that is made the standard of their truth, none of them can be termed false, but only our complex ideas of substances. 14. First, simple ideas in this sense, not false, and why? First, our simple ideas, being barely such perceptions as God has fitted us to receive, and given power to external objects to produce in us by established laws and ways, suitable to his wisdom and goodness, though incomprehensible to us, their truth consists in nothing else but in such appearances as are produced in us, and must be suitable to those powers he has placed in external objects, or else they could not be produced in us. And thus answering those powers, they are what they should be, true ideas, nor do they become liable to any imputation of falsehood, if the mind, as in most men I believe it does, judges these ideas to be in the things themselves. For God, in his wisdom, having set them as marks of distinction in things, whereby we may be able to discern one thing from another, and so choose any one of them for our uses as we have occasion, it alters not the nature of our simple ideas, whether we think that the idea of blue be in the violet itself, or in our mind only, and only the power of producing it by the texture of its parts, reflecting the particles of light after a certain manner, to be in the violet itself. For that texture in the object, by a regular and constant operation, producing the same idea of blue in us, it serves us to distinguish by our eyes that from any other thing, whether that distinguishing mark, as it is really in the violet, be only a peculiar texture of parts, or else that very colour, the idea whereof, which is in us, is the exact resemblance, and it is equally from that appearance to be denominated blue, whether it be that real color, or only a peculiar texture in it, that causes in us that idea, since the name blue notes properly nothing but that mark of distinction that is in a violet, discernible only by our eyes, whatever it consists in, that being beyond our capacities distinctly to know, and perhaps would be of less use to us if we had faculties to discern. 15. Though one man's idea of blue should be different from another's, neither would it carry any imputation of falsehood to our simple ideas, if, by the different structure of our organs, it were so ordered that the same object should produce in several men's minds different ideas at the same time. Namely, if the idea that a violet produced in one man's mind by his eyes were the same that a marigold produced in another man's, and vice versa. For, since this could never be known, because one man's mind could not pass into another man's body to perceive what appearances were produced by those organs, neither the ideas hereby nor the names would be at all confounded, or any falsehood be in either. For all things that had the texture of a violet, producing constantly the idea that he called blue, and those which had the texture of a marigold, producing constantly the idea which he constantly called yellow, whatever those appearances were in his mind, he would be able as regularly to distinguish things for his use by those appearances, and understand and signify those distinctions marked by the name blue and yellow, as if the appearances or ideas in his mind received from those two flowers were exactly the same with the ideas in other men's minds. I am nevertheless very apt to think that the sensible ideas produced by any object in different men's minds are most commonly very near and undiscernibly alike, for which opinion I think there might be many reasons offered, but that being besides my present business, I shall not trouble my reader with them, but only mind him that the contrary supposition, if it could be proved, is of little use, either for the improvement of our knowledge or conveniency of life, and so we need not trouble ourselves to examine it. 16. Simple ideas can none of them be false in respect of real existence. From what has been said concerning our simple ideas, I think it evident that our simple ideas can none of them be false in respect of things existing without us. For the truth of these appearances or perceptions in our minds, consisting, as has been said, only in their being answerable to the powers in external objects to produce by our senses such appearances in us, and each of them being in the mind such as it is, suitable to the power that produced it, and which alone it represents, it cannot upon that account, or as referred to such a pattern, be false. Blue and yellow, bitter or sweet, can never be false ideas. These perceptions in the mind are just such as they are there, answering the powers appointed by God to produce them, and so are truly what they are, and are intended to be. Indeed, the names may be misapplied, but that in this respect makes no falsehood in the ideas, as if a man ignorant in the English tongue should call purple scarlet. 17. Secondly, modes not false cannot be false in reference to essences of things. Secondly, neither can our complex ideas of modes in reference to the essence of anything really existing be false, because whatever complex ideas I have of any mode, it hath no reference to any pattern existing, and made by nature. It is not supposed to contain in it any other ideas than what it hath, nor to represent anything but such a complication of ideas as it does. Thus, when I have the idea of such an action of a man who forbears to afford himself such meat, drink, and clothing, and other conveniences of life, as his riches and estate will be sufficient to supply, and his station requires, I have no false idea, but such an one as represents an action, either as I find or imagine it, and so is capable of neither truth nor falsehood. But when I give the name frugality or virtue to this action, then it may be called a false idea, if thereby it be supposed to agree with that idea to which, in propriety of speech, the name of frugality doth belong, or to be conformable to that law which is the standard of virtue and vice. 18. Thirdly, ideas of substances may be false in reference to existing things. Thirdly, our complex ideas of substances, being all referred to patterns in things themselves, may be false. That they are all false, when looked upon as the representations of the unknown essences of things, is so evident that there needs nothing to be said of it. I shall therefore pass over that chimerical supposition, and consider them as collections of simple ideas in the mind, taken from combinations of simple ideas existing together constantly in things, of which patterns they are the supposed copies, and in this reference of them to the existence of things, they are false ideas. 1. When they put together simple ideas, which in the real existence of things have no union, as when to the shape and size that exists together in a horse is joined in the same complex idea the power of barking like a dog, which three ideas, however put together into one in the mind, were never united in nature, and this, therefore, may be called a false idea of a horse. 2. Ideas of substances are, in this respect, also false, when, from any collection of simple ideas that do always exist together, there is separated, by a direct negation, any other simple idea which is constantly joined with them. Thus, if to extension, solidity, fusibility, the peculiar weightiness and yellow color of gold, any one join in his thoughts the negation of a greater degree of fixedness than is in lead or copper, he may be said to have a false complex idea, as well as when he joins to those other simple ones the idea of perfect absolute fixedness. For either way, the complex idea of gold, being made up of such simple ones as have no union in nature, may be termed false. But if he leaves out of this his complex idea, that of fixedness, quite, without either actually joining to or separating it from the rest in his mind, it is, I think, to be looked on as an inadequate and imperfect idea rather than a false one, since, though it contains not all the simple ideas that are united in nature, yet it puts none together but what do really exist together. 19. Truth or falsehood always supposes affirmation or negation. Though in compliance with the ordinary way of speaking, I have shown in what sense and upon what ground our ideas may be sometimes called true or false, Yet if we will look a little nearer into the matter, in all cases where any idea is called true or false, it is from some judgment that the mind makes, or is supposed to make, that is true or false. For truth or falsehood, being never without some affirmation or negation, express or tacit, it is not to be found but where signs are joined or separated, according to the agreement or disagreement of the things they stand for. The signs we chiefly use are either ideas or words, wherewith we make either mental or verbal propositions. Truth lies in so joining or separating these representatives as the things they stand for do in themselves agree or disagree, and falsehood in the contrary, as shall be more fully shown hereafter. 20. Ideas in themselves neither true nor false. Any idea, then, which we have in our minds, whether conformable or not to the existence of things, or to any idea in the minds of other men, cannot properly for this alone be called false. For these representations, if they have nothing in them but what is really existing in things without, cannot be thought false, being exact representations of something, nor yet if they have anything in them differing from the reality of things, can they properly be said to be false representations, or ideas of things they do not represent. But the mistake and falsehood is 21. But are false, 1, when judged agreeable to other men's idea, without being so. First, when the mind, having any idea, it judges and concludes it the same that is in other men's minds, signified by the same name, or that it is conformable to the ordinary received signification or definition of that word, when indeed it is not, which is the most usual mistake in mixed modes, though other ideas also are liable to it. 22. Secondly, when judged to agree to real existence, when they do not. 2. When it, having a complex idea made up of such a collection of simple ones as nature never puts together, it judges it to agree to a species of creatures really existing, as when it joins the weight of tin to the color, fusibility, and fixedness of gold. 23. Thirdly, when judged adequate without being so. 3. When in its complex idea it has united a certain number of simple ideas that do really exist together in some sort of creatures, but has also left out others as much inseparable. It judges this to be a perfect, complete idea of a sort of things which really it is not, namely, having joined the ideas of substance, yellow, malleable, most heavy, and fusible, it takes that complete idea to be the complete idea of gold, when yet its peculiar fixedness and solubility in aqua regia are as inseparable from those other ideas or qualities of that body as they are one from another. 24. Fourthly, when judged to represent the real essence. 4. The mistake is yet greater when I judge that this complex idea contains in it the real essence of any body existing, when at least it contains but some few of those properties which flow from its real essence and constitution. I say only some few of those properties, for those properties, consisting mostly in the active and passive powers it has in reference to other things, all that are vulgarly known of any one body, of which the complex idea of that kind of things is usually made, are but a very few in comparison of what a man that has several ways tried and examined it knows of that one sort of things, and all that the most expert man knows are but a few in comparison of what are really in that body, and depend on its internal or essential constitution. The essence of a triangle lies in a very little compass, consists in a very few ideas. 3 lines, including a space, make up that essence, but the properties that flow from this essence are more than can be easily known or enumerated. So I imagine it is in substances. Their real essences lie in a little compass, though the properties flowing from that internal constitution are endless. 25. Ideas when called false. To conclude, a man having no notion of anything without him, but by the idea he has of it in his mind, which idea he has a power to call by what name he pleases, he may indeed make an idea neither answering the reason of things, nor agreeing to the idea commonly signified by other people's words, but cannot make a wrong or false idea of a thing which is no otherwise known to him but by the idea he has of it. Namely, when I frame an idea of the legs, arms, and body of a man, and join to this a horse's head and neck, I do not make a false idea of anything, because it represents nothing without me. But when I call it a man or Tartar, and imagine it to represent some real being without me, or to be the same idea that others call by the same name, in either of these cases I may err, and upon this account it is that it comes to be termed a false idea, though indeed the falsehood lies not in the idea, but in that tacit mental proposition, wherein a conformity and resemblance is attributed to it, which it has not. But yet, if, having framed such an idea in my mind, without thinking either that existence or the name man or Tartar belongs to it, I will call it man or Tartar, I may be justly thought fantastical in the naming, but not erroneous in my judgment, nor the idea any way false. 26. More properly to be called right or wrong. Upon the whole matter, I think that our ideas, as they are considered by the mind, either in reference to the proper signification of their names, or in reference to the reality of things, may very fitly be called right or wrong ideas, according as they agree or disagree to those patterns to which they are referred. But if any one had rather call them true or false, it is fit he uses a liberty, which every one has, to call things by those names he thinks best, though in propriety of speech, truth or falsehood will, I think, scarce agree to them, but as they, some way or other, virtually contain in them some mental proposition. The ideas that are in a man's mind, simply considered, cannot be wrong, unless complex ones, wherein inconsistent parts are jumbled together. All other ideas are in themselves right, and the knowledge about them right and true knowledge. But when we come to refer them to anything as to their patterns and archetypes, then they are capable of being wrong, as far as they disagree with such archetypes. End of section 39. Reading by Malone.
Section 40 of an essay concerning human understanding. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. An essay concerning human understanding by John Locke. Chapter 33 of the Association of Ideas. 1. Something unreasonable in most men. There is scarce anyone that does not observe something that seems odd to him, and is in itself really extravagant, in the opinions, reasonings, and actions of other men. The least flaw of this kind, if at all different from his own, every one is quick-sighted enough to espy in another, and will, by the authority of reason, forwardly condemn, though he be guilty of much greater unreasonableness in his own tenets and conduct, which he never perceives, and will very hardly, if at all, be convinced of. 2. Not wholly from self-love. This proceeds not wholly from self-love, though that has often a great hand in it. Men of fair minds, and not given up to the overweening of self-flattery, are frequently guilty of it, and, in many cases, one with amazement hears the arguings, and is astonished at the obstinacy of a worthy man, who yields not to the evidence of reason, though laid before him as clear as daylight. 3. Not from education. This sort of unreasonableness is usually imputed to education and prejudice, and for the most part truly enough, though that reaches not the bottom of the disease, nor shows distinctly enough whence it rises, or wherein it lies. Education is often rightly assigned for the cause, and prejudice is a good general name for the thing itself. But yet I think he ought to look a little further, who would trace this sort of madness to the root it springs from, and so explain it, as to show whence this flaw has its original in very sober and rational minds, and wherein it consists. 4. A degree of madness found in most men. I shall be pardoned for calling it by so harsh a name as madness, when it is considered that opposition to reason deserves that name, and is really madness. And there is scarce a man so free from it, but that if he should always, on all occasions, argue or do as in some cases he constantly does, would not be thought fitter for bedlam than civil conversation. I do not here mean when he is under the power of an unruly passion, but in the steady calm course of his life. That which will yet more apologize for this harsh name, an ungrateful imputation on the greatest part of mankind, is, that inquiring a little by the by into the nature of madness, Book 2, Chapter 11, Section 13, I found it to spring from the very same root, and to depend on the very same cause we are here speaking of. This consideration of the thing itself, at a time when I thought not the least on the subject which I am now treating of, suggested it to me. And if this be a weakness to which all men are so liable, if this be a taint which so universally infects mankind, the greater care should be taken to lay it open under its due name, thereby to excite the greater care in its prevention and cure. 5. From a wrong connection of ideas. Some of our ideas have a natural correspondence and connection one with another. It is the office and excellency of our reason to trace these, and hold them together in that union and correspondence which is founded in their peculiar beings. Besides these, there is another connection of ideas, wholly owing to chance or custom. Ideas that in themselves are not all of kin, come to be so united in some men's minds that it is very hard to separate them. They always keep in company, and the one no sooner at any time comes into the understanding, but its associate appears with it, and if they are more than two which are thus united, the whole gang, always inseparable, show themselves together. 6. This connection made by custom. This strong combination of ideas, not allied by nature, the mind makes in itself either voluntarily or by chance, and hence it comes in different men to be very different, according to their different inclinations, education, interests, and so on. Custom settles habits of thinking in the understanding, as well as of determining in the will, and of motions in the body, all which seems to be but trains of motions in the animal spirits, which, once set a-going, continue in the same steps they have been used to, which, by often treading, are worn into a smooth path, and the motion in it becomes easy, and, as it were, natural. As far as we can comprehend thinking, thus ideas seem to be produced in our minds, or, if they are not, this may serve to explain their following one another in a habitual train, when once they are put into their track, as well as it does to explain such motions of the body. A musician used to any tune will find that, let it but once begin in his head, the ideas of the several notes of it will follow one another orderly in his understanding, without any care or attention, as regularly as his fingers move orderly over the keys of the organ to play out the tune he has begun, though his unattentive thoughts be elsewhere a-wandering. Whether the natural cause of these ideas, as well as of that regular dancing of his fingers, be the motion of his animal spirits, I will not determine, how probable soever by this instance it appears to be so; but this may help us a little to conceive of intellectual habits and of the tying together of ideas. 7. Some antipathies, an effect of it. That there are such associations of them made by custom in the minds of most men, I think nobody will question, who has well considered himself or others, and to this perhaps might be justly attributed most of the sympathies and antipathies observable in men, which work as strongly and produce as regular effects as if they were natural, and are therefore called so, though they at first had no other original but the accidental connection of two ideas, which, either the strength of the first impression, or future indulgence so united, that they always afterwards kept company together in that man's mind, as if they were but one idea. I say most of the antipathies, I do not say all, for some of them are truly natural, depend upon our original constitution, and are born with us. But a great part of those which are counted natural would have been known to be from unheeded, though perhaps early impressions, or wanton fancies at first, which would have been acknowledged the original of them, if they had been warily observed. A grown person surfeiting with honey no sooner hears the name of it, but his fancy immediately carries sickness and qualms to his stomach, and he cannot bear the very idea of it. Other ideas of dislike and sickness and vomiting presently accompany it, and he is disturbed. But he knows from whence to date this weakness, and can tell how he got this indisposition. Had this happened to him by an overdose of honey when a child, all the same effects would have followed. But the cause would have been mistaken, and the antipathy counted natural. 8. Influence of association to be watched educating young children. I mention this, not out of any great necessity there is in this present argument to distinguish nicely between natural and acquired antipathies, but I take notice of it for another purpose, namely that those who have children, or the charge of their education, would think it worth their while diligently to watch, and carefully to prevent, the undue connection of ideas in the minds of young people. This is a time most susceptible of lasting impressions, and though those relating to the health of the body are by discreet people minded and fenced against, yet I am apt to doubt that those which relate more peculiarly to the mind, and terminate in the understanding or passions, have been much less heeded than the thing deserves. Nay, those relating purely to the understanding have, as I suspect, been by most men wholly overlooked. 9. Wrong connection of ideas, a great cause of errors. This wrong connection in our minds of ideas in themselves, loose and independent of one another, has such an influence, and is of so great force to set us awry in our actions, as well moral as natural, passions, reasonings, and notions themselves, that perhaps there is not any one thing that deserves more to be looked after. 10. An instance. The ideas of goblins and sprites have really no more to do with darkness than light, yet let but a foolish maid inculcate these often on the mind of a child, and raise them there together, possibly he shall never be able to separate them again so long as he lives, but darkness shall ever afterwards bring with it those frightful ideas, and they shall be so joined that he can no more bear the one than the other. 11. Another instance. A man receives a sensible injury from another, thinks on the man and that action over and over, and by ruminating on them strongly or much in his mind, so cements those two ideas together that he makes them almost one. Never thinks on the man, but the pain and displeasure he suffered comes into his mind with it, so that he scarce distinguishes them, but has as much an aversion for the one as the other. Thus hatreds are often begotten from slight and innocent occasions, and quarrels propagated and continued in the world. 12. A third instance. A man has suffered pain or sickness in any place. He saw his friend die in such a room. Though these have in nature nothing to do one with another, yet when the idea of the place occurs to his mind, it brings, the impression being once made, that of the pain and displeasure with it. He confounds them in his mind, and can as little bear the one as the other. 13. Why time cures some disorders in the mind, which reason cannot cure. When this combination is settled, and while it lasts, it is not in the power of reason to help us, and relieve us from the effects of it. Ideas in our minds, when they are there, will operate according to their natures and circumstances. And here we see the cause why time cures certain affections, which reason, though in the right and allowed to be so, has no power over, nor is able against them to prevail with those who are apt to hearken to it in other cases. The death of a child, that was the daily delight of its mother's eyes and joy of her soul, rends from her heart the whole comfort of her life, and gives her all the torment imaginable. Use the consolations of reason in this case, and you were as good preach ease to one on the rack, and hope to allay, by rational discourses, the pain of his joints tearing asunder. Till time has by disuse separated the sense of that enjoyment and its loss from the idea of the child returning to her memory, all representations, though ever so reasonable, are in vain, and therefore some, in whom the union between these ideas is never dissolved, spend their lives in mourning, and carry an incurable sorrow to their graves. 14. Another instance of the effect of the association of ideas. A friend of mine knew one perfectly cured of madness by a very harsh and offensive operation. The gentleman who was thus recovered, with great sense of gratitude and acknowledgment, owned the cure all his life after, as the greatest obligation he could have received. But, whatever gratitude and reason suggested to him, he could never bear the sight of the operator. That image brought back with it the idea of that agony which he suffered from his hands, which was too mighty and intolerable for him to endure. 15. More instances. Many children, imputing the pain they endure at school to their books they were corrected for, so join those ideas together that a book becomes their aversion, and they are never reconciled to the study and use of them all their lives after, and thus reading becomes a torment to them, which otherwise possibly they might have made the great pleasure of their lives. There are rooms convenient enough that some men cannot study in, and fashions of vessels which, though ever so clean and commodious, they cannot drink out of, and that by reason of some accidental ideas which are next to them, and make them offensive. And who is there that hath not observed some man to flag at the appearance, or in the company of some certain person, not otherwise superior to him, but because, having once on some occasion got the ascendant, the idea of authority and distance goes along with that of the person, and he that has been thus subjected is not able to separate them. 16. A curious instance. Instances of this kind are so plentiful everywhere, that if I add one more, it is only for the pleasant oddness of it. It is of a young gentleman, who, having learnt to dance, and that to great perfection, there happened to stand an old trunk in the room where he learned. The idea of this remarkable piece of household stuff had so mixed itself with the turns and steps of all his dances, that though in that chamber he could dance excellently well, yet it was only whilst that trunk was there. Nor could he perform well in any other place, unless that or some such other trunk had its due position in the room. If this story shall be suspected to be dressed up with some comical circumstances, a little beyond precise nature, I answer for myself that I had it some years since from a very sober and worthy man upon his own knowledge as I report it, and I dare say there are very few inquisitive persons who read this, who have not met with accounts, if not examples, of this nature that may parallel, or at least justify this. 17. Influence of association and intellectual habits. Intellectual habits and defects, this way contracted, are not less frequent and powerful, though less observed. Let the ideas of being and matter be strongly joined, either by education or much thought. Whilst these are still combined in the mind, what notions, what reasonings will there be about separate spirits? Let custom from the very childhood have joined figure and shape to the idea of God, and what absurdities will that mind be liable to about the Deity? Let the idea of infallibility be inseparable joined to any person, and these two constantly together possess the mind. And then one body in two places at once shall, unexamined, be swallowed for a certain truth by an implicit faith, whenever that imagined infallible person dictates and demands assent without inquiry. 18. Observable in the opposition between different sects of philosophy and of religion. Some such wrong and unnatural combinations of ideas will be found to establish the irreconcilable opposition between different sects of philosophy and religion. For we cannot imagine every one of their followers to impose wilfully on himself, and knowingly refuse truth offered by plain reason, interest though it does a great deal in the case, yet cannot be thought to work whole societies of men to so universal a perverseness as that every one of them to a man should knowingly maintain falsehood. Some at least must be allowed to do what all pretend to, that is, to pursue truth sincerely, and therefore there must be something that blinds their understandings, and makes them not see the falsehood of what they embrace for real truth. That which thus captivates their reasons and leads men of sincerity blindfold from common sense, will, when examined, be found to be what we are speaking of. Some independent ideas, of no alliance to one another, are, by education, custom, and the constant din of their party, so coupled in their minds, that they always appear there together, and they can no more separate them in their thoughts than if they were but one idea, and they operate as if they were so. This gives sense to jargon, demonstration to absurdities, and consistency to nonsense, and is the foundation of the greatest, I had almost said, of all the errors in the world, or, if it does not reach so far, it is at least the most dangerous one, since, so far as it obtains, it hinders men from seeing and examining. When two things in themselves disjoined appear to the sight constantly united, if the eye sees these things riveted which are loose, where will you begin to rectify the mistakes that follow in two ideas that they have been accustomed so to join in their minds as to substitute one for the other, and, as I am apt to think, often without perceiving it themselves? This, whilst they are under the deceit of it, makes them incapable of conviction, and they applaud themselves as zealous champions for truth, when indeed they are contending for error. And the confusion of two different ideas, which a customary connection of them in their minds hath to them made in effect but one, fills their heads with false views, and their reasonings with false consequences. 19. Conclusion. Having thus given an account of the original sorts and extent of our ideas, with several other considerations about this, I know not whether I may say instruments or materials of our knowledge, the method I at first proposed to myself would now require that I should immediately proceed to show what use the understanding makes of them, and what knowledge we have by them. This was that which, in the first general view I had of this subject, was all that I thought I should have to do, but upon a nearer approach I find that there is so close a connection between ideas and words, and our abstract ideas and general words have so constant a relation one to another, that it is impossible to speak clearly and distinctly of our knowledge, which all consists in propositions, without considering, first, the nature, use, and signification of language, which therefore must be the business of the next book. End of section 40. End of an essay concerning human understanding by John Locke.